On Christmas Eve, a lonely millionaire weeps silently on a snow-covered bench, consumed by guilt over losing his mother. Everything changes when a little boy comes up to him and, with a simple gesture, offers to let him borrow his mom for a hug and some hot chocolate. From this unlikely encounter, a new chance for love and belonging begins to blossom. If this story has you hooked, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Let's get right into it. I promise you this is going to be the best story you've ever heard. Chapter 1. Christmas Eve in New York City had that special glow that only the holiday can bring to the city. The avenues were adorned with lights that blinked in a steady rhythm, as if dancing to the sound of Christmas carols echoing from shops and brownstones. The smell of gingerbread and hot chocolate perfumed the air, mingling with the scent of pine from the decorated trees that graced the squares and parks. Families walked the streets, carrying shopping bags and wide smiles, while excited children ran ahead, pointing at the luminous decorations that transformed the metropolis into a fairy tale scene. For Richard Miller, however, none of it made sense. Sitting on a bench in Central Park, wrapped in the chilly New York night air, he watched the movement around him as if separated from the world by an invisible wall. The colored lights decorating the trees around him seemed to blur through the tears that insisted on streaming down his face. He no longer bothered to hide them. There was no one to judge him here, on this bench, covered by a thin layer of frost that mimicked snow, in the middle of a park that, even in the midst of celebration, offered corners of solitude for those who needed it. Richard was 42 years old and had built a tech empire valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. His company developed artificial intelligence software for major corporations, and his name was frequently cited in business magazines as one of the country's most promising entrepreneurs. He had apartments in upscale neighborhoods, imported cars, access to exclusive circles. But on this night, all that wealth felt absolutely empty, useless, insignificant in the face of the pain consuming him from within. A few hours earlier, while in a meeting with Japanese investors who had flown in specifically to close an international expansion deal, his cell phone had buzzed insistently. They were calls from Mount Sinai Hospital. Richard glanced at the screen, saw the number, but didn't answer. He was in the middle of a crucial presentation, with figures projected on the wall and Asian executives analyzing every detail of his proposal. That contract represented his company's definitive entry into the Asian market, a 5-year dream coming to fruition. He silenced his phone and continued talking about growth projections and return on investment. When the meeting finally ended 2 hours later, he called the hospital back. The nurse's voice on the other end of the line was gentle but firm. His mother, Helen, had passed away a few hours earlier, alone in a hospital bed while waiting for him. The sentence echoed in Richard's mind like a muffled scream. She had passed, alone, waiting for him. Helen was all the family he had left. His father had left when he was still a teenager, and his mother had raised him alone, working as a seamstress in a small shop in the garment district. They were years of struggle, of tight budgets, of silent sacrifices so he could attend good schools and have opportunities she never had. Richard remembered Helen's calloused hands, always busy with needles and fabrics, sewing school uniforms, prom dresses, baby clothes. She never complained, never showed fatigue. She just smiled when he came home from school and asked how his day had been. When Richard began to prosper in business, he wanted to repay all of it. He bought her a comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood, hired a nurse to assist her when her health began to fail, and made sure she had the best health insurance available. But what he didn't give, and what she wanted most, was time, presence. In recent years, his visits had become increasingly sparse, always justified by urgent meetings, business trips, unavoidable commitments. Helen never complained. She just said she understood that she was proud of him, that he was building something important. And now she was gone, alone, waiting for him. The guilt Richard felt was like a physical weight on his chest, a pressure that made each breath difficult. He had left the hospital after handling the necessary arrangements, refusing offers from friends and colleagues to accompany him. He didn't want company. He didn't want empty condolences. He got in his car, drove aimlessly through the decorated streets of New York, and ended up parking near Central Park. He walked to that bench, sat down, and let the tears fall freely. The park was less crowded in this area, far from the main entrances where families gathered for the celebrations. Here, among illuminated trees and the distant sound of laughter and Christmas music, Richard wept for all he had lost and for all he could never recover. He wept for the mother who was gone, for the wasted opportunity to be present, for the hugs he never gave, for the conversations he never had. He wept for the emptiness that now inhabited him, a void so deep it felt capable of swallowing him whole. That's when a child's voice interrupted his dark thoughts. "Mister, you're crying." Richard looked up, startled. Before him stood a small boy, no older than 5 or 6. He wore a red wool coat, jeans, and a Santa hat that drooped to one side, giving him an air that was both comical and adorable. His eyes were large and dark, full of an innocent curiosity and a genuine concern that only children can express without filters. Richard quickly wiped his face with his hands, trying to compose himself, but the tears stubbornly continued to fall. "I am," he replied, his voice hoarse and tired. "But you don't need to worry." "Why are you crying?" the boy insisted, sitting down on the bench next to him without asking, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Did you hurt your knee, or was someone mean to you?" Richard couldn't help but manage a bitter smile at the simplicity of the question. How could he explain to a child the complexity of guilt, regret, irreparable loss? "No, nothing like that," he said softly. "I'm sad because I lost someone very important to me today." "Who?" the boy asked, tilting his head to the side. "My mum." The boy was silent for a moment, processing the information. Then, with a seriousness surprising for someone so young, he said, "I can lend you my mum. She gives the best hugs in the world and makes the best hot chocolate in New York. When I'm sad, she always makes me happy again. Maybe she can make you stop crying too." Richard felt something stir inside his chest, something that wasn't pain. It was tenderness, surprise, a strange emotion in the face of such pure and unpretentious generosity. For the first time in hours, he truly smiled. "That's very kind of you, but I don't think your mum would like being lent out like that," he said, trying to keep his tone light. "She won't mind," the boy replied with conviction. "She always says we have to take care of people who are sad. Come with me, she's right over there, she'll like you." Before Richard could respond, a woman's voice echoed through the park, laced with worry. "Leo, Leo, where are you?" The boy jumped off the bench and waved energetically. "I'm here, Mom. I'm here with a new friend." A woman emerged from between the trees, walking briskly toward them. She wore a simple beige wool coat, jeans, and flat boots. Her brown hair was tied in a messy ponytail, and her face expressed a mix of relief and exasperation at finding her son. When her eyes landed on Richard, still sitting on the bench with red, swollen eyes, her expression shifted to concern. "Leo, how many times have I told you not to run off like that?" she said, holding the boy's hand firmly. "You scared me." "Sorry, Mom, but I saw this man was crying, and I came to see if he was okay. He said he lost his mom today." The woman looked at Richard, and for a brief moment something passed between them. A silent understanding, a recognition of shared pain. She knew what it was to lose someone. It was written in her eyes, in the way her expression softened immediately. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said, her voice low and sincere. "I know how hard it is." "Thank you," Richard replied, getting up from the bench. "Your son is very kind. He offered to lend you to me to make me feel better." The woman let out a soft laugh, but there was tenderness in her gaze as she looked at her son. "He has a huge heart," she said, "sometimes too big for his own good. My name is Anna Clark, and this little hurricane here is Leo." "Richard Miller," he replied, extending his hand. "I'm sorry for being like this. I didn't mean to draw attention or worry anyone." "You don't have to apologize for feeling," Anna said, shaking his hand briefly. "We all go through tough times. No one should have to go through them alone, especially on Christmas Eve." There was a silence between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with meaning. Leo, apparently satisfied with having resolved the situation, tugged on his mother's coat sleeve. "Mom, can we take Mr. Miller home? He's all alone and sad. We have way too much food. You said so yourself. And it's Christmas. Nobody should be alone on Christmas." Anna looked at her son, then at Richard clearly, torn between the natural caution of a single mother and the compassion Leo had inherited from her. "Leo, honey, we can't just invite strangers home like that," she began, but Richard interrupted her gently. "It's okay. I completely understand. You've already done so much for me. Just with your kindness, I'll be fine." But even as he said it, Richard knew it was a lie. He wasn't fine. He wasn't going to be fine anytime soon. The prospect of returning to his empty apartment, of spending the night alone replaying memories and drowning in guilt, was almost unbearable. Anna must have seen something in his expression, because she hesitated, looking again at her son and then back at Richard. Something in his eyes, perhaps the recognition of a pain she herself had lived through, made her make a decision. "You know what?" she said softly. "Leo's right. It's Christmas and no one should be alone. If you'd like, we really do have enough food for more than 3 people at home. Nothing fancy, but it's made with care. And I can guarantee you, Leo isn't exaggerating about the hot chocolate. It really is that good." Richard looked at her, surprised. There was something in the sincerity of that invitation, in the genuine concern on her face that touched him deeply. It had been years since anyone had cared about him as a person, only as a businessman, a source of business opportunities or investments. Here was a stranger offering him something simple and precious, genuine human companionship in a moment of need. "Are you sure?" he asked, still hesitant. "I don't want to impose." "It's no trouble," Anna replied with a small smile. "Sometimes life puts people in our path exactly when we need them, or when they need us. Come on, we live just a few blocks from here." Leo let out a cheer and took Anna's free hand, then extended his other hand to Richard. "Come on, Mr. Miller. You'll see, my mum's a great cook. She made stuffing, mashed potatoes, roast chicken, and even French toast for dessert." Richard, still somewhat dazed by the sudden turn his lonely night had taken, accepted the boy's small hand and let himself be led by the two of them. As they walked through the illuminated neighborhood streets, passing decorated houses and families gathered together, he wondered how he had ended, up here following a single mother and her young son to an unknown apartment, but for some reason he couldn't quite explain. It felt right. It felt like the place he was supposed to be on this night. The building where Anna lived was on a quiet street, a modest but well-kept pre-war building. The elevator was small and old, with mirrored walls and a faint smell of cleaning products. Leo chattered non-stop on the way up, talking about the presents he'd gotten, the story his grandmother had read to him over a video call earlier, and the cake he'd helped his mum bake that morning. The apartment was small, maybe 650 square feet, but it was cozy in a way Richard's spacious, minimalist penthouses had never been. The living room walls were a soft cream color, decorated with framed children's drawings and a few family photos. A small artificial Christmas tree occupied a corner, adorned with handmade ornaments and colored lights. The sofa was old, but comfortable, covered with colorful throws. The small, round dining table was already set with simple but neat place settings. "Make yourself at home," Anna said, taking off her coat and hanging it on the rack near the door. "I'm just going to heat up the food. Leo, take off your coat and wash your hands." "Can I help with anything?" Richard offered, feeling out of place and yet strangely at home. "You can just relax," she replied with a smile. "Go ahead, sit on the sofa. It won't take long." Richard sat down, watching Leo run to the bathroom and then return, pulling off his Santa hat and tossing it on the sofa next to Richard. The boy then grabbed a storybook from the shelf and climbed onto the sofa sitting next to him with disarming naturalness. "Do you want me to read to you?" Leo asked, opening the book. "I'm still learning, but I can read some words already." "I'd love to hear it," Richard replied, and for the first time on that terrible day, he felt something like peace begin to settle in his chest. While Leo read with concentrated effort, stumbling over some words and asking for help with others, Anna moved back and forth between the kitchen and the living room, bringing dishes, arranging things. creating an atmosphere of home that Richard hadn't experienced in years. The smell of home-cooked food filled the apartment, mingling with the soft pine scent of the Christmas tree. When they finally sat down at the table for dinner, Richard found himself surrounded by a simplicity that was both strange and deeply comforting. The food was delicious, prepared with care and love. Leo talked non-stop, telling stories about school, his friends, the cartoons he liked to watch. Anna listened attentively, asked questions, laughed at her son's silly jokes. And Richard, for the first time in a long time, just existed in that moment, without thinking about meetings, contracts, profit margins, or market expansion. During dessert, Leo asked if Richard liked stories, and before he could fully answer, the boy was already bringing over a pile of books. Anna apologized for her son's enthusiasm, but Richard just smiled and said it was okay. More than that, it was exactly what he needed. Anna read story after story, giving different voices to each character, making Leo laugh with her exaggerated interpretations. Richard found himself laughing too, a genuine laugh that seemed to come from a place inside him that had been dormant for years. And when Leo finally started to doze off between them on the sofa, his head resting on Richard's arm with the absolute trust only children possess, he felt a deep and indefinable emotion wash over him. Anna carefully carried her son to his room, and when she returned, she found Richard looking around the apartment with a thoughtful expression. "You have a beautiful home," he said quietly. "It's not about the size or the luxury. It's about how it feels in here. It's been a long time since I've felt this." Anna sat in the armchair across from him, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. There was so much unsaid in that silence, so many stories of pain and rebuilding that each of them carried. "I know what it's like to lose someone important," she said finally. "My husband passed away 3 years ago. It was hard. It still is sometimes. But you learn to keep going, especially when you have someone depending on you, like Leo depends on me. He kept me on my feet when all I wanted to do was fall apart." "I'm sorry for your loss," Richard said, "and thank you for everything. For taking me in, for showing me that there's still genuine kindness in the world. I had forgotten that." "Sometimes we get lost," she replied softly. "But there's always a way back if we're willing to look for it." It was late when Richard finally got up to leave. Anna insisted on packing a piece of French toast for him to take, and he accepted with a smile. At the apartment door there was a moment of hesitation. "I'd like to stay in touch," Richard said, "if you don't mind. I don't have many people in my life I can really talk to. And tonight, you and Leo gave me something I didn't know I needed so desperately." "I'd like that too," Anna replied, and they exchanged phone numbers. When Richard left the building and walked to his car, the Christmas Eve night still sparkled around him, but now the lights seemed a little less distant, a little less irrelevant. He still felt the pain of his loss, the guilt still gnawed at him, but now there was something else too, a small spark of something he couldn't quite name. Hope, perhaps, or the possibility of a new beginning, or simply the reminder that even in the darkest moments, human kindness still exists and can reach us when we least expect it. Chapter 2. The days following Christmas Eve were the most difficult Richard had ever faced in his adult life. The next morning brought with it the brutal reality he had managed to postpone for a few hours in the company of Anna and Leo. There were arrangements to be made, decisions to be made, people to be notified. Helen's funeral had to be organized, and Richard found himself immersed in an endless sequence of calls, documents, and conversations with funeral home employees who spoke in low, respectful tones about caskets, flowers, and ceremonies. He did it all on autopilot, as if conducting a particularly difficult business meeting. He chose the mahogany casket his mother would have found too beautiful and too expensive. He selected arrangements of white lilies, her favorite flowers. He wrote a notice for the obituary section of the newspapers, each word weighing tons on his chest. He arranged everything with the cold efficiency of someone accustomed to solving complex problems, but inside he was shattered. The wake took place 2 days after Christmas in a quiet chapel downtown. A few of Helen's neighbors attended, along with colleagues from the old shop where she had worked and the nurse who had cared for her in her final months. Richard greeted everyone, thanked them for their condolences, and listened to stories about his mother that made him realize just how much he had distanced himself from her in recent years. An elderly woman, who had been Helen's friend for decades, held his hands tightly and said with tears in her eyes that his mother always spoke of him with immense pride, that she showed his pictures from business magazines to all her friends, that she said she was so happy he had achieved so many of his dreams. Those words, spoken with such affection, cut Richard like sharp blades. His mother was proud of him, but he had let her die alone. All the success in the world couldn't make up for that final absence. During the wake, his phone vibrated several times, messages from colleagues expressing formal condolences, reminders of meetings that needed to be rescheduled, urgent emails from clients. Richard ignored them all, but there was one message that caught his attention. It was from Anna. The message was simple, direct, without any farce or excessive formality. It just said, "Hi Richard, Leo and I are thinking of you. I know these must be very difficult days. If you need company or just someone to talk to, we're here. No pressure, no obligation. Just know you're not alone." Attached to the message was a photo of a drawing Leo had made. It was a colorful, childlike image of 3 people holding hands under a starry sky. One of them had dark hair and wore a suit, another wore a dress and had long hair, and the third was small and wore a Santa hat. At the top of the drawing, in large, crooked letters, was written, "For Mr. Miller, who was sad." Richard stared at that drawing for a long time, sitting in one of the chapel chairs while people around him conversed in low tones. Something inside him shifted, like a door that had been locked for years was finally being opened. He typed a reply, deleted it, typed again, and finally sent, "Thank you, from the bottom of my heart. This drawing means more to me than you can imagine. When all of this is over, I'd love to see you both again." The reply came a few minutes later, "Whenever you want. We're here." In the days that followed, as Richard faced the painful task of clearing out the house where his mother had lived, he kept in constant contact with Anna. They weren't long or deep conversations at first, just small exchanges of messages that served as anchors of normalcy amidst the emotional chaos. She sent pictures of her day-to-day life with Leo, little updates about simple things, questions about how he was feeling. He replied when he could, always grateful for that discreet but constant presence. Helen's house was in a quiet residential neighborhood, and every room was filled with memories that assaulted Richard like violent waves. The living room with the sofa where he used to do his homework while his mother sewed late into the night. The small kitchen where she prepared dinner and talked to him about his day. His bedroom, which she had kept almost untouched since he had moved out more than 20 years ago, with old posters on the wall and school competition trophies on the shelf. But the hardest part was her room. There, among simple but well-cared-for clothes, among boxes of thread and fabric, Richard found a drawer full of newspaper clippings. They were all the articles ever published about him, about his company, about his professional successes. She had saved everything, organized chronologically, as if she were building an archive of maternal pride. Alongside the clippings were letters he had sent when he was younger, photos of them together at birthdays and graduations, and a notebook where she jotted down important dates in his life. Richard sat on the floor of that room and cried like he hadn't cried since he was a child. He cried for everything he had lost, for all the moments that would never return, for all the conversations they would never have. But he also cried for something deeper, for the realization that he had wasted precious time chasing things that, in the end, meant absolutely nothing compared to what truly mattered. It was in that moment, with red eyes and a broken heart, that he picked up his phone and typed a message to Anna. "I'm at my mum's house. I don't think I can do this alone. Can you talk for a few minutes?" The reply came almost instantly. "Of course, want me to call?" And she called. Anna's voice on the other end of the line was soft, understanding, non-judgmental. She didn't try to minimize his pain or offer platitudes. She just listened as he talked about the drawer of clippings, about the guilt that consumed him, about the feeling of having failed the most important person in his life. And when he finally ran out of words, she shared her own story. She told him about the day she received the news that her husband, Daniel, had been in a car accident on his way home. He was a civil engineer returning from a construction site in another city. It was sudden, without warning, without time for goodbyes. One moment he existed, and the next, she was alone with a 2-year-old son to raise. She told him about the months of numbness that followed, about how Leo asked for his father every day, and she didn't know how to explain that he wasn't coming back. She told him about the nights she cried hidden in the bathroom so her son wouldn't see her, about the struggle to keep the house, pay the bills, continue working as a teacher while her world fell apart around her. But after all that, she said, there was a choice. She could let herself sink into the pain, or she could choose to live for the son who depended on her. It wasn't easy. Some days were still terrible, but little by little she learned that life goes on, that it's possible to carry the pain and still find moments of joy, that honoring those who are gone doesn't mean stopping living, but living in a way that would make that person proud. Richard listened in silence, absorbing every word as if it were medicine for an open wound. When she finished speaking, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "How are you so strong?" "It's not strength," she replied gently. "It's a choice. Every day I choose to keep going. Some days that choice is easier, others it's almost impossible. But I keep choosing. And you can do that too, Richard. Your mother wouldn't want you to lose yourself in guilt. She would want you to live, to be happy." That conversation lasted for over 2 hours. When they finally said goodbye, Richard felt a little lighter, as if part of the crushing weight he carried had been shared and therefore lessened. He finished packing up his mother's house that day, sorting things to donate, keeping precious memories, closing that chapter with the painful awareness that it was necessary. A week after the funeral, Anna invited him for coffee. It was a simple invitation made unpretentiously, but Richard accepted with an excitement that surprised him. They met at a small, cozy coffee shop in the West Village, far from the hustle and bustle of the city's business district. The place had wooden tables, walls decorated with works by local artists, and an irresistible smell of fresh coffee and baked goods. Anna arrived a few minutes after him, her hair loose and falling over her shoulders, a shy smile on her lips. She wore a simple floral dress and a denim jacket, and Richard noticed, for the first time consciously, how beautiful she was. Not an ostentatious or manufactured beauty, but something natural, genuine, that came from within. They talked for hours. They talked about their childhoods, about the dreams they had when they were young, about how life has a peculiar way of leading us down paths we never imagined. Anna said she had always wanted to be a writer as a teenager, but life led her to teaching, and now she loved being a second-grade teacher. She spoke about her students with evident affection, about how each child was a unique universe, about the joy of seeing a student finally understand something they had been trying to learn for weeks. Richard talked about his business career, but for the first time, without the automatic tone of pride he always used at business events. He talked about the price he paid for that success, about the friendships he left behind, about the relationships that never blossomed because he was always too busy, always traveling, always in meetings. He talked about how he had built an empire, but had forgotten to build a life. There were moments of silence between them, but they weren't uncomfortable. They were natural pauses, breaths in a conversation that flowed with surprising ease. And there were moments of laughter too, especially when Anna told funny stories about Leo and his impossible-to-answer questions, or when Richard admitted he couldn't even fry an egg and survived basically on restaurant food and takeout. When they finally left the coffee shop, it was already getting dark. Richard insisted on walking her home, and they strolled through the illuminated streets of New York, talking about random things and sometimes just enjoying the comfortable silence between them. When they reached her building, there was a moment of hesitation at the goodbye. "I really enjoyed today," Richard said, his hands in his pockets, feeling strangely like a nervous teenager on a first date. "Me too," Anna replied, smiling. "You're very good company, Richard, and I hope you know you can count on me whenever you need to talk or just don't want to be alone." "Can I come up and see Leo?" he asked impulsively. "I wanted to thank him in person for the drawing. It meant a lot to me." Anna seemed surprised but happy with the request and nodded. They went up together, and when she opened the apartment door, Leo ran to her and hugged her, then looked at Richard with wide eyes of surprise and joy. "Mr. Miller, you came to visit," the boy exclaimed, and before Richard could answer, Leo was already pulling his hand, leading him to the living room. "Come see, I made another drawing for you. This one has dinosaurs." Richard spent the next 2 hours there playing with Leo, listening to his stories about school, seeing his favorite toys. Anna prepared dinner, and again they sat together at the table, and again Richard felt that comforting sense of belonging that was starting to become addictive. It was so different from his previous life, so far from the business dinners in expensive restaurants where they talked about numbers and strategies. Here, in the simplicity of that small apartment, with a woman who worked as a teacher and a boy who loved dinosaurs and superhero stories, he was finding something. He had been searching for his whole life without knowing it. When Leo fell asleep on the sofa again, Anna carried him to his room and returned to find Richard looking at the photos on the wall. There were many of Leo at different ages, some of Anna with people who were probably her parents, and a few of a dark-haired man with a wide smile next to Anna and a baby Leo. "That's Daniel," Anna said softly, approaching. "My husband. He was an amazing person. He worked too much, just like you," she added with a sad smile. "But he loved being home. He always said that work was just work, but family was life. Sometimes I wonder if he knew he didn't have much time, if that's why he cherished every moment as if it were his last." Richard looked at the photo, at the genuine smile of this man he would never know, and felt a strange mix of emotions. It wasn't exactly jealousy, but a kind of melancholic admiration. That man had had what Richard was only beginning to understand he wanted: a family, a home, true love. "He was lucky to have you and Leo," Richard said finally. "We were lucky to have him," Anna corrected gently. "And I choose to believe he would be happy to know that we're still living, that we're still finding moments of joy. Life didn't end when he was gone. It was different, harder in many ways, but it's still worth living." She turned to look Richard directly in the eyes, and there was something intense in that gaze, something that made his heart race. "And you deserve to live too, Richard. You deserve to find joy again. You deserve to build new memories. You deserve not to punish yourself for the rest of your life for something you can no longer change. Your mother wouldn't want that for you." "How can you be so sure?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Because no mother does," she replied simply. "And because I've seen the way you look at Leo, how you smile when you play with him, how your eyes light up when you allow yourself to just exist without carrying all that weight. You're a good person, Richard, and good people deserve happiness." There was a charged silence between them. Richard wanted to say so many things, but the words seemed insufficient, too small to express the whirlwind of emotions he felt. So instead of speaking, he just reached out and gently touched her arm, a small gesture full of meaning. "Thank you," he said finally, "for everything. For taking me in that night, for talking to me when I needed it most, for showing me that there's still kindness and compassion in the world. You and Leo are helping me find my way back to myself." Anna smiled, and there were tears glistening in her eyes too. "Sometimes we find each other exactly when we need to," she said softly. "And maybe we need each other more than we realize." When Richard finally left the apartment that night, it was late. But this time, as he drove through the streets of New York, he didn't feel completely lost. There was a direction now, even if he didn't know exactly where it was leading. There was Anna and Leo. There were genuine conversations. There were moments of laughter and simplicity that brightened the difficult days. And there was, for the first time since his mother's death, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could rebuild his life in a way that truly mattered. The days turned into weeks, and Richard found himself creating a routine he had never imagined possible. He started visiting Anna and Leo regularly, not just occasionally, but several times a week. He brought treats for Leo, books he thought the boy might like, small gifts that made the child's eyes sparkle with joy. He helped Anna with household chores, discovering with surprise that there was a simple satisfaction in things like washing dishes side by side while they talked about their day, or folding laundry together, while Leo watched cartoons in the living room. He began to understand their routine. He discovered that Leo loved pancakes for Sunday breakfast, that Anna had a habit of reading before bed, that the child was afraid of thunder and needed company during storms. He learned that Anna liked strong coffee in the morning and chamomile tea at night, that she always hummed while she cooked, that she had a special way of arranging the sofa cushions that he found adorable. And amidst all this, something was changing within him. The pain of his mother's loss was still there, probably always would be, but now it was accompanied by other emotions. Gratitude for the memories he had, a determination to live in a way that would honor her, and something new, something that grew every time he saw Anna smile, every time Leo called him Mr. Miller with that childish joy, every time he found himself looking forward to returning to that simple apartment that was becoming more of a home than any place he had ever lived. One evening, after putting Leo to bed, Anna and Richard were talking on the small apartment balcony. The city stretched out before them, lights twinkling in the distance, the muffled sound of traffic creating a kind of urban soundtrack. Anna held a cup of tea, and Richard held a glass of water, both enjoying the cool night air. "Can I ask you a question?" Anna said after a long silence. "What do you want from life now? Not what you think you should want or what others expect of you. What do you really want?" Richard thought for a long moment before answering. It was a question he had been asking himself for the past few weeks, but one he hadn't yet had the courage to answer completely, even to himself. "I want to matter," he said finally, "not in the corporate sense of making a difference in a company's numbers or in the market. I want to matter to real people. I want to have someone who misses me when I'm not around. I want reasons to wake up in the morning that aren't meetings or contracts. I want to build memories that are actually worth something. I want," he hesitated, then continued more quietly, "I want to belong somewhere, to someone." Anna looked at him with an intensity that made him blush slightly. "You already belong, Richard," she said softly. "To Leo, to me. If you want to, of course." "And do you want me to?" he asked, turning completely to face her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Because I do. More than I probably should. More than I ever expected. But I want to be here, with you two. I want to be a part of your lives if you'll have me." Anna set her teacup aside and took a step toward him. There were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. "I do," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And Leo already adores you and I," she hesitated, then took a deep breath and continued. "I'm starting to feel things for you that I haven't felt in a very long time. And it scares me, but it also makes me happy, because I didn't think I could feel this way again." Richard reached out and gently touched her face, wiping away a tear that had escaped. "I'm scared too," he admitted. "But for the first time in a long time, I'm scared in a good way. I'm scared of losing this, of messing it up, of not being good enough for you. But I'm willing to try if you are." Anna covered his hand with hers, pressing it against her cheek. "I'm willing," she whispered. And then, under the starry New York sky, surrounded by the distant sound of the city that never sleeps, they kissed. It was a gentle kiss, filled with unspoken promises, shared hopes, of two wounded hearts finding healing in each other. And when they finally pulled apart, they were both crying and smiling at the same time, because they knew that something had irrevocably changed between them, something beautiful and scary, and absolutely right. Chapter 3, The Few. Weeks following that kiss on the balcony were of an emotional intensity Richard had never experienced before. It was as if he were rediscovering the world through new eyes, learning to live in a way completely different from what he had known for the past 20 years of his life. And with this rediscovery came changes, some small and subtle, others deep and revolutionary. The first major change happened at his company. Richard called an extraordinary meeting with his partners and directors, something he rarely did without a specific agenda about expansion or new contracts. When everyone gathered in the conference room, their expressions curious and slightly apprehensive, Richard announced that he was stepping back from the day-to-day management of the company. Not completely, he clarified to the shocked faces around the table, but significantly. He would remain as chairman of the board and maintain his equity stake, but he would delegate the daily decisions to the team of directors he himself had trained and prepared over the years. The reaction was mixed. Some partners expressed concern about the impact of this decision on the business, while others questioned if he was going through some kind of crisis. Richard listened patiently and then explained with an honesty that surprised everyone in the room that he had recently lost his mother and that this loss had made him rethink his priorities. He had built a successful company, achieved goals many would consider impossible, but in the process he had lost something essential: his humanity, his connections, his ability to simply live. A heavy silence filled the room when he finished speaking. Then Mark, his oldest partner and a friend since college, was the first to react. He stood up, walked over to Richard and hugged him, something they had never done in all their years of professional partnership. "You're doing the right thing," Mark said, his voice hoarse. "I've watched you lose yourself these past few years, turn into a work machine, and I confess, I've lost myself too. Maybe we all need to learn from this." That meeting ended unexpectedly, with several directors sharing their own stories of personal sacrifices for work, of children who grew up barely knowing them, of marriages that nearly failed because of excessive hours at the office. And when Richard left that room, he knew he had made the right decision. The company would continue to run, perhaps even better without his constant controlling presence, and he would finally have time to live. The second major change was in his personal routine. Richard sold his penthouse apartment in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the city, that minimalist and cold space that looked more like a showroom from a design magazine than a home. He also sold 2 of the 3 cars he owned, keeping only a practical and discreet vehicle. He cancelled memberships to exclusive clubs he rarely visited and donated designer clothes he would never wear again. With the money from the apartment sale and a new perspective on what he truly needed, Richard looked for a place to live that was close to Anna and Leo. He found an apartment in the same neighborhood, just 3 blocks away. It was smaller than any place he had lived in his adult life, but it had something the other spaces never had: the potential to become a home. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, a large living room with a balcony, an open-plan kitchen, and a pleasant view of a tree-lined square. Richard furnished it with care, but this time without hiring expensive decorators or buying Italian designer furniture. He chose each piece with comfort and functionality in mind: a large, soft sofa where he could curl up with a book, a wooden dining table that could seat more people, shelves for the books he was rediscovering the pleasure of reading. And in the second bedroom, which was initially intended as an office, he left empty space, with a secret hope in his heart. Throughout the moving process, Anna and Leo were present. Leo was thrilled with the new apartment, running through the empty rooms and declaring it perfect. Anna helped Richard choose curtains, decide where to place the furniture, and transform that space into something welcoming. And there was a growing intimacy between them in every shared gesture, in every decision made together. They still hadn't officially defined what they were to each other. There were stolen kisses when Leo wasn't looking, hands intertwined during evening walks, hugs that lasted a little longer than would be appropriate for mere friends. But there was also hesitation, especially on Anna's part, who carried the understandable fear of fully committing to something new after so long of guarding her heart. Richard respected this time, this need to go slow. He himself was navigating uncharted waters, learning to relate genuinely after years focused only on transactions and negotiations. And Leo, in his childlike innocence, was naturally speeding up the process without even realizing it. The boy had adopted Richard in a completely disarming way. He started asking for Mr. Miller to take him to the park, wanted to show him his new drawings, asked him to read stories before bed. Anna watched it all with a mix of joy and apprehension, clearly touched by the connection between the two, but also protective of her son, fearing he would get too attached and end up hurt if things didn't work out. One day, about 2 months after that first Christmas, Leo asked a question that changed everything. The 3 of them were in Richard's new apartment, helping to organize books on the shelves, when the boy stopped what he was doing and looked at Richard with that disconcerting seriousness that sometimes took over his young face. "Mr. Miller, do you like my mum?" he asked directly, without beating around the bush. Anna choked on the coffee she was drinking and Richard felt his face grow warm, but he didn't look away from the boy. If there was one thing he had learned from Leo, it was that honesty was the only possible answer to genuine questions. "Yes, Leo, I like your mum very much," he replied calmly. "She's an incredible person." "And you like me too?" Leo continued, as if conducting an interrogation. "Very much," Richard confirmed, an involuntary smile appearing on his lips. "You're one of the best friends I've ever had." Leo processed this information for a moment, then nodded, satisfied. "Then you can be my dad, Richard," he declared, as if it were the most logical conclusion in the world. "I had a dad before, Daddy Daniel. Mummy says he's in heaven now, watching over me from there. But I can have two dads, can't I? One in heaven and one here. And you can be the one here." The silence that followed was heavy and charged with emotion. Tears were streaming down Anna's face, and Richard felt his own throat tighten. He knelt in front of Leo, getting down to the boy's eye level. "It would be a huge honor to be your dad, Richard," he said, his voice choked. "If your mom agrees, of course." Anna wiped her tears and approached them, crouching down beside them. "I agree," she said softly. "If that's what you want, my love, and if that's what Richard wants too, then I agree." Leo let out a shout of joy and threw himself into Richard's arms, hugging him with that disproportionate strength little kids have when they're happy. Richard hugged him back, and over the boy's head, his eyes met Anna's. So much was being said in that look, so many silent promises, so many fears being overcome, so much love beginning to bloom. From that day on, the dynamic between the three of them changed subtly but significantly. Richard was no longer just a close friend or a frequent visitor. He was part of the family, recognized and accepted by its most important member, Leo. And with that acceptance came a responsibility that Richard embraced with seriousness and joy. He started picking Leo up from school a few times a week, giving Anna a ride since she worked at the same time. He learned to prepare the boy's favorite snack, to help with homework, to attend parent-teacher conferences. He discovered there was immense joy in small things, like tying Leo's shoelaces, or cleaning a scraped knee after a fall in the park, or listening to excited stories about what happened at school that day. And with Anna, the relationship blossomed naturally and inevitably. They became partners in the truest sense of the word, sharing responsibilities, supporting each other, building a routine together that worked. Richard learned to cook with her, discovering a meditative pleasure in chopping vegetables side by side while they talked about their day. She helped him reconnect with parts of himself he had buried under layers of ambition and work, reminding him that he liked music, movies, and just walking around with no destination in mind. There were challenges, of course, moments when the difference between their worlds became apparent. Anna sometimes felt uncomfortable when Richard, out of habit, wanted to solve problems with money, buying things or paying for services. She made him understand that not everything could or should be solved that way, that sometimes what Leo needed was time and attention, not expensive gifts. And Richard had to unlearn years of corporate conditioning, learn that not everything in life was a negotiation or a problem to be solved with efficiency. But they worked. Through these differences with patience and open communication, Richard was genuinely willing to learn, and Anna was willing to teach and also to learn from him. Because despite their differences, they shared something fundamental: the desire to build a life that had real meaning, based on love and genuine connection. 3 months after that first meeting in the park, Richard made a decision that would definitively seal his transformation. He scheduled a meeting with his lawyer and his accountant, and together they structured a plan for him to donate a significant portion of his fortune to charitable institutions. Not all of it. He still needed to ensure financial security for himself and, he hoped, for Anna and Leo. But a substantial part was allocated to causes his mother had always supported: orphanages, public schools, community hospitals. When he told Anna about this decision, she looked at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "That's a lot of money, Richard. You don't have to do this to prove anything." "It's not about proving anything," he replied, holding her hands. "It's about honoring. My mother worked her whole life with almost nothing, and still, Always donated what she could to those who had less. She taught me that true wealth isn't in how much you accumulate, but in how much you share. I forgot that for a long time, but now I want to live by those values. I want Leo to grow up seeing that money is a tool for doing good, not an end in itself. Anna kissed him then. A long, deep kiss that said everything words couldn't express. And in that moment, Richard knew with absolute certainty that he was on the right path. The weeks turned into months, and Richard's life became unrecognizable compared to what it had been a year before. He woke up early, not to read work emails or prepare presentations, but to have breakfast with Anna and Leo, enjoying those precious mornings before everyone left for their respective activities. He took Leo to school and chatted with other parents at the gate, something he had never imagined doing. He picked the boy up in the afternoon and took him to the park, pushing the swing and helping to build castles in the sandbox. He learned to prepare family dinners, to watch cartoons without looking at his phone, to play with toy cars and superheroes without feeling like he was wasting time, because he had finally understood that this wasn't wasting time. This was living. This was building memories. This was being present in the moments that truly mattered. And gradually he also began to notice changes in himself that went beyond external actions. The guilt over his mother's death was still there, probably always would be, but it had transformed into something different. It was no longer a crushing weight that prevented him from breathing, but a gentle reminder that life is fragile and time is precious. He visited Helen's grave regularly, sometimes alone, sometimes with Anna and Leo. He spoke to her in his thoughts, told her about his new life, about the people he had found, about how he was trying to live in a way that would make her proud. One afternoon, about 5 months after the Christmas that had changed everything, Anna greeted Richard at her apartment with a serious expression that immediately worried him. Leo was at a friend's house, so they were alone, and her seriousness made him apprehensive. "Did something happen?" he asked, sitting next to her on the sofa. "No, nothing bad," she replied quickly, but then hesitated. "Or at least I don't think it's bad, but it's important, and we need to talk about it." Richard waited patiently, giving her time to gather her thoughts. "These last few months have been incredible," she began finally. "You've become a part of our lives in a way I never imagined possible. Leo adores you, and she paused, took a deep breath. "I love you, Richard. I know it might be early to say that, but it's the truth. I've fallen in love with you for the person you are, for the way you treat Leo, for your generosity and kindness, for your willingness to change and grow." Richard's heart soared. He knew he felt the same, but hearing those words spoken aloud was different. It was real in a way that made everything feel more intense and scary and wonderful at the same time. "I love you too," he said, his voice firm and clear. "I love you. I love Leo. I love the life we're building together. I love who I've become since I met you." Anna smiled, but there was still something tense in her expression. "Then we need to decide where we go from here," she said, "because what we're doing now, this thing of living in separate apartments but spending all our time together, is starting to get confusing, especially for Leo. He calls you Daddy Richard, but you go home every night. He asks when you're going to move in with us." "And what do you want?" Richard asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. "I want you to live with us," she said simply. "I want to wake up with you every morning. I want you to be there when Leo wakes up from a nightmare. I want to share closet space and argue about the toilet seat and do all those mundane and wonderful things that people who live together do, but only if you want it too, and only if you're sure, because Leo is already very attached, and I can't let him get hurt if you decide this isn't what you want." Richard pulled her closer, hugging her tightly. "I'm sure," he said against her hair. "More sure than I've ever been of anything in my life. I want to live with you. I want to be an official part of this family. I want to be there for all the moments, big and small. I know I still have a lot to learn about being a father, about being a partner, about building a family life, but I want to learn all of it with you." Anna pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes, and there were tears on her face, but she was smiling broadly. "Then let's do it," she said. "Let's move in together. We can sell both apartments and buy a bigger one, or we can stay in yours since it's more spacious, or we can stay here, which is small, but it's where Leo grew up and has all his memories. It doesn't matter where, as long as it's together." Richard thought for a moment, then said, "What if we look for a new place for all of us? A place that isn't just yours or just mine, but ours, where we can create our own memories, truly start as a family. Not too far from here, so Leo doesn't have to change schools, but something that belongs to all of us." Anna considered the idea and then nodded, her smile widening. "I like that idea. Something new. For a new beginning." And so, on that afternoon of important conversations and life-changing decisions, Richard and Anna took the next big step in their journey together. In the days that followed, they began looking for apartments, taking Leo along so he could give his opinion. They found a perfect place in a family-friendly building, with 3 bedrooms, a large living room, a kitchen big enough for family cooking, and most importantly, close to Leo's school and Anna's work. The move was done with care and love, mixing belongings from both homes, deciding together what to keep and what to leave behind. Richard brought his books and some furniture. Anna brought the memories and objects that gave life to a home. And Leo, of course, brought his toys, his drawings, his contagious energy that transformed any space into a place full of life. When they were finally completely settled, about 6 months after that transformative Christmas, the 3 of them sat on the sofa in the new living room, exhausted but happy, surrounded by still unpacked boxes and furniture in positions that would probably have to be changed. Leo was. Between the 2 adults holding each of their hands, a huge smile on his face. "Now we're a real family," he declared with satisfaction. "Daddy Richard lives with us and everything." Richard looked at Anna over the boy's head, and the 2 exchanged a look filled with emotion and gratitude. Yes, they were a family now. Not a traditional family, not a family that followed the expected script, but a family built on solid foundations of love, understanding, and conscious choice. And for Richard, who had started that year lost and alone, crying on a park bench, this was more than he had ever dared to hope or dream of. Chapter 4. The first Christmas that Richard, Anna, and Leo spent together as an official family was completely different from the previous one, but equally memorable in its own way. The apartment they now shared was decorated with garlands, colorful lights, and a Christmas tree that the 3 of them had chosen and decorated together, each ornament representing a memory or a special moment they had lived in the past few months. Leo was ecstatic at the prospect of having Daddy Richard home on Christmas Day, of waking up and finding him there, of opening presents all together. He had made a huge list for Santa Claus, full of toys and childish wishes, but at the top of the list, written in neat letters that Anna had helped him form, was, "I want Daddy Richard to stay with us forever." Richard cried when he saw it, hugging the boy with an intensity that made Anna emotional too. Christmas morning dawned bright and sunny, a stark contrast to the foggy, cold night of the previous year. Richard woke up early before Anna and Leo and lay in bed for a few minutes, just absorbing the reality of where he was. Beside him, Anna slept peacefully, her hair spread across the pillow, a look of peace on her face. In the next room, he could hear Leo's soft snores, who would probably wake up soon full of energy and excitement. He got up slowly, trying not to wake Anna, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. While waiting for the water to boil, he looked around the apartment, observing the signs of a shared life everywhere. Leo's shoes tossed near the door, Anna's workbag on the sofa, his own, reading glasses on a pile of books on the coffee table. Framed photos on the walls showing the 3 of them at different moments, in the park, on a day at the beach, at Leo's birthday, at a simple dinner at home. This was home. This was family. This was everything. The sound of quick little footsteps pulled him from his thoughts, and Leo appeared in the kitchen, still in his pajamas, his eyes wide with excitement. "Daddy Richard, it's Christmas. Santa already came," he practically shouted, and Richard laughed, putting a finger to his lips to quiet him. "Let's wake your mum up slowly, okay? She deserves to sleep a little longer." But Leo was already running back to the bedroom, and soon Richard heard Anna's sleepy voice, followed by more laughter. He poured coffee for her, hot chocolate for Leo, and the three of them gathered in the living room still in their pajamas to open the presents under the tree. The morning was chaotic and wonderful, full of torn paper, shouts of joy from Leo, and knowing smiles between the adults. Richard had bought gifts for both of them, but nothing extravagant or overly expensive as he would have in the past. He had chosen carefully, thinking about what each of them would truly like. For Leo, adventure books, a kid's science kit, superhero costumes. For Anna, a first edition of a book she had mentioned loving as a child, a soft wool shawl she always admired in a shop near the school, an old music box that played a melody that reminded her of her childhood. And Anna had gifts for him too. A wool sweater she had knitted herself, working on it secretly at night when he stayed late at the office. A photo album she had carefully put together, documenting every important moment of the past few months. The first time he picked Leo up from school, the day they moved into the new apartment, small, everyday moments she had captured when he wasn't paying attention. And Leo, with his mother's help, had made a framed drawing showing the three of them holding hands, with a large red heart in the sky above them. After opening the presents, they prepared Christmas lunch together. Richard had learned to cook reasonably well in recent months, and he helped Anna prepare the turkey, the stuffing, the mashed potatoes, the salad. Leo was in charge of making gingerbread cookies for dessert, with supervision, of course, and the kitchen became a lovely mess of flour, dough, and laughter. During lunch, as they savored the food prepared with love, Leo raised his glass of grape juice, imitating the adults when they made a toast, and said seriously, "I want to make a toast to our family, because we are the best family in the whole world." Richard and Anna raised their glasses, their eyes shining with unshed tears, and repeated, "To our family." In the afternoon, after Leo finally tired of playing with all his new presents and took a nap on the sofa, Richard and Anna talked quietly, snuggled together, watching the boy sleep. "Do you remember last Christmas?" Anna asked softly. "How you were when we met?" Richard nodded, the memory still vivid in his mind. "I remember every detail. I was completely lost, drowning in guilt and pain. I couldn't see a way out, couldn't imagine a future, and then a 5-year-old boy showed up offering to lend me his mom." Anna laughed softly, stroking Richard's hair. "Best loan I ever made," she joked. "You never gave me back." "And I never will," Richard replied, kissing her gently. "You two saved me, you know. From myself, from the empty life I was living, from the downward spiral I was in. You showed me what really matters." "You saved us too," she countered. "I was starting to believe I could never love anyone again, that my heart had permanently closed after losing Daniel. And Leo needed a father figure, even though I tried to be everything for him. You brought light back into our lives, Richard. You completed us in a way I didn't know was missing." They were silent for a moment, just absorbing the peace and fullness of that moment. "You know what I'd like to do," Richard said finally. "I'd like to go back to that bench in the park, where it all began. I think it would be important, in a way, to come full circle." Anna considered the idea and then smiled. "I think that would be beautiful. When do you want to go?" "Tonight, after dinner, the three of us together." And so, after a light dinner of leftovers from lunch and more gingerbread cookies, they bundled up and went out to Central Park. The night was cold but starry, and the park was illuminated with Christmas decorations even more elaborate than the year before. Families strolled along the paths, children ran laughing, groups of friends had nighttime picnics on the grassy areas. Leo held a hand of each adult, swinging his arms energetically as he walked between them, humming Christmas carols he had learned in school. They passed trees decorated with twinkling lights, nativity scenes set up at different points in the park, and carolers performing traditional Christmas songs. Finally, they reached that bench, the same bench where Richard had sat, a year ago, alone and shattered. It looked so different now, illuminated by the festive lights, surrounded by joy and life. But it was the same bench, a silent witness to a meeting that had changed everything. Richard sat down slowly, and Anna sat beside him, pulling Leo onto her lap. For a long moment, the three of them just sat there, watching the park's activity, listening to the distant sounds of laughter and music. "This is where you were crying," Leo said suddenly, looking at Richard with those big, serious eyes. You were very sad because of your mom. It was right here, Richard confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. I was at the lowest point of my life, and then you showed up and changed everything. I just wanted to help you, Leo said simply. Mommy always says that when someone is sad, we have to be kind. And you were very kind, Richard replied, hugging the boy. The most important kindness anyone has ever shown me. Are you still sad about your mum? Leo asked, concern evident on his young face. Richard thought carefully before answering, wanting to be honest but not to frighten the boy. Sometimes. I am sad, yes, he said finally. I miss her. I miss being able to talk to her, to hug her. But you know what's changed? Now when I think of her, I don't just feel sadness. I feel gratitude too. Gratitude for having had such an amazing mother, for all the things she taught me, for all the sacrifices she made for me, and I think she would be very happy if she could see me now, living the life I'm living, with the family I've built. Anna squeezed his hand, silent tears streaming down her face. She would be so proud of you, she said softly, of who you've become, of how you've opened your heart, of how you love Leo as if he were your own son from day one. She would have loved you both, Richard said, his own voice breaking. She would have loved to meet you, Anna, and she would have spoiled Leo rotten like any good grandmother would. Leo was thoughtful for a moment, then said something that moved both adults deeply. So, I have two grandmas in heaven now. Grandma Helen and the grandma I never met, my daddy Daniel's mom. They can be friends up there and take care of us together. Richard couldn't hold back the tears. He pulled Leo into a tight hug, and Anna joined them, the three of them embracing tightly on that bench, united by bonds that were not of blood, but of choice, of love, of a deep connection that transcended traditional definitions of family. You know what I realized? Leo said when they finally separated. It's a good thing I lent you my mom that day, because now you're not sad anymore, and I got another dad. Everybody won. It was a great deal. Richard and Anna laughed through their tears, because only a child could see things so simply and profoundly at the same time. And Leo was right. It had been a great deal, the best of all. They stayed on the bench for a while longer, just watching life happen around them. Richard looked at the twinkling lights on the trees, at the families passing by, at the couples holding hands, and felt a deep and complete peace. A year ago he had been right here, broken and lost, and now he was whole in a way he had never been before. Life has a strange way of working, he thought. Sometimes you have to fall completely apart to be able to rebuild yourself the right way. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what truly matters. And sometimes, just sometimes, in your darkest moment, salvation comes in the form of a little boy with a giant heart offering to lend you his mum to make you smile again. When they finally got up to go home, Leo held Richard's hand and looked up at him seriously. Promise you'll never leave? He asked, and there was a small but real fear in his eyes, the fear of a child who had already lost someone important and was afraid of losing again. Richard knelt before the boy, looking directly into his eyes. I promise, Leo. I'm not going anywhere. You, your mum, and me, we're a family now. And families stick together no matter what. You can always count on me. For the rest of my life. Leo smiled, satisfied, and then, with that disconcerting, childlike logic, completely changed the subject. Can I have more hot chocolate when we get home? Anna laughed and ruffled her son's hair. Yes, you can. My love. Yes, you can. They walked back through the park, hand in hand, a small family that hadn't even existed a year ago. And as they walked, Richard looked up at the starry sky and said a silent prayer, thanking his mother for everything she had taught him, apologizing for not being there when she needed him, but also sharing with her, wherever she was, the joy and fullness that now filled his life. Thank you, he thought. Thank you for teaching me about love, about sacrifice, about what really matters. It took me a long time to learn these lessons, but I learned them, and I'm living now in a way I know would make you proud. I'm taking care of people I love. I'm present in the moments that matter. I'm building a life that has real meaning. I hope you can see this from where you are. I hope you know that your son finally understood what you always tried to teach." That night, after putting Leo to bed, after he finally succumbed to the exhaustion of a long and exciting day, Richard and Anna sat on their apartment balcony, watching the illuminated city below, the soft sound of distant celebrations reaching them. "1 year," Anna said softly. "1 year since everything changed." "The best year of my life," Richard replied without hesitation, "and I can't wait for the next ones." She snuggled against him, and they sat there in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, but united by the certainty that they had found something rare and precious. Richard thought about everything that had happened in that transformative year. It had begun in loss and pain, in guilt and loneliness, but through that pain he had found something he never knew he was looking for. He had found purpose, connection, true love. He had learned that success isn't measured in money in the bank or professional recognition, but in shared moments, in the smiles of loved ones, in small hands that trust in yours, in hugs that don't want to end. He had learned that family isn't always the one we're born into. Sometimes it's the one we choose, the one that chooses us back, that forms in unlikely moments through unexpected connections. He wasn't born to be Leo's father, but now he couldn't imagine his life without that extraordinary boy in it. He hadn't been looking for Anna, but now she was the center of his world, the person who knew him in depths he himself had barely explored. And his mother, Helen, whom he had lost so painfully and abruptly, continued to be a part of his life in a different way. She lived on in the lessons she had taught him, in the values he now chose to honor, in the memory he carried with love, instead of just guilt. She had been his first teacher of unconditional love, of sacrifice, of putting others first. And now he was finally putting those lessons into practice. "There's something I want to ask you," Richard said suddenly, breaking the silence. Anna pulled back a little to look at him, curiosity on her face. "What is it?" Richard took a deep breath. He had been thinking about this for weeks, but tonight seemed like the perfect moment, returning to the place where it all began, closing the circle of transformation that this year had represented. "Marry me," he said, simply and directly. "I know we already live together. I know we're already a family in every way that matters, but I want to make it official. I want you to be my wife. I want us to build a future, knowing we're committed to each other in every possible way. I want Leo to have the security of knowing this is permanent, that I'm not just someone who lives with you, but someone who chose you forever." Anna was silent for a long moment, tears streaming freely down her face. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse with emotion. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I want to marry you. I want to build that future with you. I want us to be a family officially, in the eyes of the whole world, not just in our own." They kissed then, a long, deep kiss that sealed a promise, that celebrated a love that had blossomed from the ashes of pain and loss. And when they finally pulled apart, they were both crying and laughing at the same time, because that mix of emotions was the essence of life, the proof that joy and sadness, past and future, loss and gain, all coexist and intertwine in ways impossible to predict. "We have to tell Leo," Anna said, wiping her tears. "He's going to be so happy." "Tomorrow morning," Richard agreed. "We'll make it an extra Christmas surprise." And so, as the city slept around them, as the last Christmas celebrations died down and the world prepared for a new year, Richard and Anna held each other on the balcony, planning a future that neither of them had imagined a year ago, a future built on solid foundations of love, understanding, mutual respect, and a deep commitment to being present in the moments that truly matter. The next morning, when Leo woke up and they told him about the wedding, the boy's reaction was exactly what they expected. He jumped out of bed, shouted with joy, and ran around the house celebrating as if he had just received the best gift ever. And then, with that sudden seriousness that sometimes took hold of him, he stopped in front of Richard and asked, "When you get married, can I just call you Dad without the Richard at the end?" Richard knelt before him, his eyes welling up. "It would be an honor," he said, "but only if you want to. I know you already had a dad, Daddy Daniel, and I'll never try to replace him or erase his memory." Leo thought for a moment, then said with a wisdom beyond his 6 years, I think Daddy Daniel would be happy to know I have you now. And I think you can have two dads, even if one is in heaven. But yes, I want to just call you Dad, because that's what you are to me." And so on that post-Christmas morning, a family was consolidated in every possible way. In the months that followed, Richard, Anna, and Leo planned a simple but meaningful wedding. They didn't want anything big or ostentatious, just something that celebrated the love that united them and the journey that had brought them there. The wedding took place in the spring, in a small ceremony in a flower garden, with only close friends and family present. Leo was the ring-bearer, wearing a little suit that made him look like a tiny gentleman, carrying the rings with seriousness and pride. Anna was radiant in a simple but elegant dress, and Richard had never felt so nervous and happy at the same time in his entire life. And when the officiant asked if they promised to love, honor, and care for each other for all the days of their lives, in good times and in bad, they answered with firm voices and eyes shining with tears, "Yes, we promise." And when they were declared husband and wife, when they kissed under emotional applause, Leo ran to them and hugged them, creating a three-person embrace that perfectly symbolized what this union represented. It wasn't just two becoming one, but three becoming an indissolubly united family. The years that followed were filled with the normal ups and downs of any family. There were difficult moments, arguments over small things, everyday stresses. Leo grew up and went through all the typical phases of childhood and adolescence, sometimes challenging, sometimes sweet, always loved. Richard learned to be a father through trial and error, making mistakes, but always striving to be present, to listen, to support without smothering. Anna and Richard built a marriage based on open communication and mutual respect. They never stopped surprising each other, discovering new layers in the person they had chosen to spend their lives with. They eventually had more children, expanding their family, but Leo always held a special place in Richard's heart, that first son who had taught him the meaning of unconditional love. Richard never fully returned to the aggressive corporate world he had left behind. He maintained his role on the company's board, but dedicated most of his time to philanthropic work, especially projects related to education and support for low-income families. He used his resources and connections to make a real difference in people's lives, honoring his mother's memory in ways she could never have imagined. And every year, at Christmas, the family returned to that bench in Central Park. It became a tradition, a way to remember where it all began, to honor the moment that had changed all their lives. They took a photo in the same spot, and over the years those photos documented Leo's growth, the addition of new siblings, the maturing of Richard and Anna. But they always showed the same thing: love, unity, family. And always, when they were on that bench, Richard would look up at the starry sky and think of his mother. He would talk to her in his thoughts, tell her about his life, about the grandchildren she would have loved, about the man he had become. And he liked to believe that, wherever she was proud. Proud that he finally understood that true wealth is not measured in professional achievements or bank balances, but in shared moments, in love given and received, in being able to say, at the end of each day, that you made a difference in the life of someone who matters to you. Because in the end, that's what remains, not the contracts signed or the deals closed, but the people we love, the memories we create, the bonds we build. And Richard had learned this lesson in the most painful way possible, through loss. But he had also learned that from the deepest pain can be born the truest joy, that from the ashes of destruction can rise something new and beautiful, that it's never too late to change, to grow, to choose a life that has real meaning. And as he sat on that bench, with his wife beside him and his children around him, listening to laughter and feeling the warmth of that connection that kept him anchored and complete, Richard knew with absolute certainty that he had found his way back home, not to the physical house where he grew up or to the luxurious apartment he once owned, but to the true home that exists where there is love, where there is presence, where there are people who choose you every day and whom you choose back with the same intensity. And on that Christmas night, one more in a series of many yet to come, Richard made a silent promise. To his mother, to his family, to himself. The promise to continue living with intention, to never again take for granted those he loves, to be present in every moment that matters. Because life is fragile and precious, and we never know how much time we have. But what we can control is how we live that time, how we love, how we choose to be present instead of just existing. And as they walked back home that night under a sky full of stars, a family united by bonds stronger than blood, forged through choice and love and commitment, Richard felt a deep and overwhelming gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance life had given him. Gratitude for Anna and Leo appearing in his darkest moment. Gratitude for having had the courage to allow himself to change, to open himself, to love, to build something new on the ruins of what he had lost. Because sometimes, just sometimes, when we are completely broken, when we think there is nothing left but pain, life surprises us. It sends us a 5-year-old boy with a giant heart, offering to lend us his mom to make us smile. It gives us a second chance to get it right, to truly live, to build a family not based on obligation or tradition, but on conscious choice and true love. And that, Richard thought as he opened the door to his home and was greeted by the warmth and light and the smell of home, that is the most important lesson of all. That family is not just who shares our blood, it's who shares our journey, who chooses us in our worst moments and stays with us through the storms. It's who truly sees us in all our imperfection and humanity and loves us anyway. It's who turns a house into a home, who turns moments into memories, who turns a life into something worth living. And for that, for all of that, Richard was grateful. Not just on that Christmas, but every day. Grateful for the pain that transformed him. Grateful for the loss that redirected him. Grateful for the extraordinary people who entered his life exactly when he needed them most. And as he hugged his family that night, surrounded by love and warmth and the absolute certainty of belonging, he knew that finally, he had found what he had always been searching for without knowing it. He had found home, he had found family, he had found himself.